Hello, I'm Tyler Esselman.
And I'm Michael Osinski.
And you are listening to This One Goes to 11.
This One Goes to 11, Season 5 is the podcast where we invite people to talk with us about an album that they believe is perfect.
So perfect, in fact, Michael. So perfect. That 10 out of 10 just isn't good enough.
It is not good enough. 4 seasons long. Yeah, I know.
Let's go.
It's crazy.
Oh, yeah. It feels good.
Yeah. Not quite at our second anniversary though. I feel like we're treating seasons the way that British television treats series. You know,
mm-hmm.
we're technically
seasons of Survivor too, because there's been how many seasons of Survivor now, and hasn't been that many years.
That's true. It's more, and I think in the UK they say series, so I guess we're technically series 5.
Series 5.
Series 5. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And boy, oh boy, what a way to start off the season.
I know. I'm really excited for everybody to hear this one. It's a crazy good album, crazy good guest. Just really, really strong way to start. Who are we talking to this week, Michael?
We are talking to Jared Michael Delaney. Jared is a stage and screenwriter and actor based in Philadelphia. His plays have been produced at Perseverance Theater, New Jersey Rep, Inishnuith Theater Company, the Yes Festival, Edinburgh Festival, Theater Conspiracy, the Philadelphia Live Arts Festival, and many, many more. His play Voyager 1 was named a top 10 production of the year in New Jersey in 2019. As an actor, he's appeared on stages off-Broadway and regionally across the U.S., including the Folger Theater, Pennsylvania Shakes, Philadelphia Theater Company, and NJ Rep. TV credits include Mayor of Easttown, Dispatches from Elsewhere, and various commercials, including one for the Pennsylvania Lottery that takes place at what looks to be a Benihana, but probably isn't for, trademark reasons. Film credits include Kinderwald, Universal Signs, Love and Communication, Hayride to Hell, and the upcoming Alice and the Vampire. Most importantly, he is the co-host of a weekly podcast about the musician Prince, titled When Doves Podcast, available on all platforms.
So he doesn't really stay busy, probably. He's just kind of...
just sitting around.
He's kind of a lazy bones.
Yeah, not doing much. Oh, yeah.
He's a treat. I'm so glad I got to meet him and share this space with him right now. His podcast is excellent. Yeah, he really brings the heat, as we like to say. And I don't want to say, I'm going to let him say which artist we're talking about. I don't know. Yeah. It's just good, right? Happy season 5, buddy. I'm glad we're doing this.
And it's also, I know it's an artist that's near and dear to your heart, Tyler, which, dear listeners, we're trying something new this season, a little sort of surprise segment that'll be coming up, not within the episodes, but just stay tuned, especially for our Spotify listeners. Some little surprises throughout the season. I don't want to say any more. We'll
goodies and treats. Just know that if you listen to this podcast, you have goodies and treats incoming.
Exactly. And I do love sugar, so...
You do. We both do.
Yeah. It's a problem, but anyway. All right. Without further ado, let's go right to it. And do you want us to use your middle name or just Jared Delaney?
Oh, Jared Delaney's fine. Okay. Jared Michael Delaney's like my actor playwright name. It doesn't matter.
It has a nice ring to it. I like that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Are you Irish perchance?
What makes you say that?
I don't know. Just a guess.
Yeah. We did the DNA test. My brother got it for us as Christmas gifts a couple years ago, and it was like 94% Irish.
Wow.
And the other 6% were English. So yeah, Irish.
Okay, yeah. Irish. You're from the same area. Yeah. Well then formally let us say, Jared Delaney, welcome to This One Goes to 11.
Thank you very much. I'm very happy to be here. Very excited to be here today.
Yes, we're excited to have a fellow podcaster on the pod from the When Doves podcast.
That's correct.
Great podcast. Highly recommended.
Thank you very much.
Oh, yeah. And we're sorry that I'm sure there's a particular album that you probably would have wanted to talk about that was off the table by Prince that we covered in our first season, or not?
Of course. No, of course. Of course. But the thing about Purple Rain. So for folks who don't know, my podcast partner Ed Miller and I, When Does Podcast, we do this deep career dive into Prince, and we go through all of his records chronologically and interview guests and all that kind of good stuff. And the thing about Purple Rain is that it is definitively a classic record. I mean, there's just no question about it. And so, of course you would pick it, because even now you listen to it, at least I do, and you kind of go, this is nearly flawless. Maybe it is flawless. And there comes a point where you say, how much more can I add to this particular conversation about Purple Rain? Although I would certainly be willing to give it a go. But at some point, you're like, it's okay. It's Everest. It's already there. Everyone knows that it's there.
It's also a pedagogical question, I think, because what are Michael and I contributing to, this further music zeitgeisty podcast thing with our experiment. And I guess it's kind of like whatever you want. That's what I like about this podcast space, is like there is room for you to do this deep dive, and I have found that there is lots of room for us to dive on the albums that we have. So I think you do a service. If I don't say so myself.
Well, thank you. And I think what you guys do that's so great is when you have your guests on. Well, here's the thing about any art form, but with rock music in particular, hearing it from a different perspective, why it matters to this person,
exactly.
Why did it connect to whoever the guest is, or whoever the audience member is. I think that's one of the most essential things about the enduring power of rock and roll music, is how much it impacts people personally.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe that's true of, I mean, that's true of a lot of art, of course, but I think there's something about rock and roll that does it in particular, at least it does for me. And it creates an emotional sort of resonance that's hard to shake. And
it's not replicable in another medium, not in the same way.
I agree. It's not.
Okay. Yeah. Before we get too deep, Jared, what album hath thou brought before this one goes to 11 tribunal? Because we got to mention it. We got to say the name.
We got to mention it. Yeah, we got to mention it. So another Everest album. My album I am bringing forth today is The Rise and Fall of Ziggy Stardust and the Spiders from Mars by David Bowie.
Oh man, it rolls trippingly off the tongue.
It does. It does. I like an epic title. I like when I like something epic. Yeah.
Tyler and I both attempted, I don't know how far you got, Tyler. We attempted a full album listen of all his entire discography before this episode, catalog, and I ran out of time.
Because it's much like Prince, it's an enormous catalog. There's a tremendous amount of material, and I'm a Bowie obsessive. I'm one of those people. I'm not alone in that. There's a lot of Bowie obsessives.
No.
And the breadth of his material and the stuff he attempted and the directions he went in, it takes a while to absorb, and sort of is like it can take a lifetime to study.
Oh, yeah. And there's what I think is cool about this is I hope for our listeners, and we're going to provide a surface for them so that they might get a little view into Bowie in just a moment, if they don't know Bowie or they're not, they're amateur Bowieists. But what I think is cool is that because his eras are so, they get less clearly defined, I think, as his career went on. But since they are pretty clearly defined, the different eras of Bowie, it gives you different jumping off points into, the kind of stuff that wasn't that great from particular eras, or the stuff that didn't hit at the time, the stuff that maybe is part of the language of what he was trying to do in a particular era of his career. And, there's a lot of entry points, which I appreciate about his catalog, and is not the way with other artists. And it makes him accessible in a unique way.
He does well, here's the thing about Bowie, among many things. He made very conscious decisions about his artistic paths. Like, he didn't just sort of float along and fall into things. He would say to himself, I want to try this now. I want to do this thing now. So when I was a kid, my Bowie entry point was the Let's Dance era, right? The early 80s MTV era. That's when I first saw him. And those, Let's Dance is a tremendous record, but then the records that followed, Tonight and Never Let Me Down, they are widely regarded as being the nadirs of his artistic career. However, I kind of love those records. Like, dude, I don't know what to say, because those are the records I grew up with first. And so for me, it was like I came in there and then went backwards and went forwards with him, and you get to explore more and dive deeper and see what a transformational artist he was, and all the things he attempted. So I think it's pretty wild. But I do think you can access him depending on what kind of music you're interested in hearing. Are you interested in hearing rock and roll? Are you interested in hearing sort of Euro trash synth pop? Are you interested in hearing pop music? Are you interested in hearing industrial music? Like, we've got periods for all that. Do you want to hear his folk period? We got it. Like, we have all those things.
Whatever the hell Low is. Are you interested in hearing Low?
Low is so good. Yeah,
it
Low
is so good.
Tremendous. Low was named by Pitchfork. I think it was Pitchfork said Low was the greatest album of the 70s.
They would.
That sounds like a pitchfork thing.
It's a very pitchforky thing to do. On our podcast, we're forever referencing and mocking Pitchfork all the time.
Yeah, you have to.
Yeah, that's happened a few times with us.
Yeah.
Wait.
Let's do it. Let's do my bit. It's Jared, I have been tasked with doing a 60-second intro to Bowie, which, I mean, Herculean. Would that be? Yeah, is that one? I'm not going to pat my own back here. I think I did a nice little job of it. We'll see if I can do it in 60 seconds. But this is everyone's favorite segment. It is the beginner's guide to the rise and fall of Ziggy Stardust and the Spiders from Mars by David Bowie in 60 seconds. Michael, do you have 60 seconds on the clock for me?
I sure do. Are you ready to do this?
Well, I'm as ready as I'm ever going to be.
Okay. Starting in 3, 2, 1, go.
He's an alligator. He's a mama papa coming for you. He's David goddamn Bowie. Though he hardly requires an introduction, DB was born David Robert Jones in Brixton, London in 1947. While his singing voice was deemed passable by school choir dilettantes, David showed musical and more broadly creative proclivities from an early age. Heavily influenced, even mesmerized by the stage presence and music of American artists like Fats Domino, Elvis, and of course Little Richard, Bowie formed his first band in 1962 at the tender age of 15. It wasn't until 1969's Space Oddity that he really found his audience, and this kicked the creative door open for Bowie to evolve into the daring, chameleonic, extraterrestrial, artistic being whose stardust we feel sprinkled throughout modern music today. 1972's The Rise and Fall of Ziggy Stardust and the Spiders from Mars is widely considered Bowie's most influential album, showcasing the glam rock vernacular he has become so closely associated with, and led to his infamous immersion into the Ziggy Stardust character. We lost him way too young in 2016, but if you're alive today, you love music and you love to get freaky, let's be honest, in at least some part you have Bowie to thank.
Very nice. Chameleonic. I gotta send out particular props for the use of the word chameleonic. Very nice.
Thank you.
Tyler, that is up there in the best intros you've done.
Good. Good.
Thank you. I'm proud of that one. I'm proud. He's near and dear to my heart. You know, I'm showing my cards, but I know I have to be a quote unquote objective observer. But I'm really.
What is objectivity in 2023, Tyler?
I mean,
exactly. It's just not there. So, Jared, how did I do? If you had to rate, it sounds like I did an all right job in your book, but if you had to give me a grade for my 60-second intro to Bowie and this album in particular, in whatever terms you see fit, how did I do?
I think that was a very solid A minus. You know, I thought it was very well done. You hit the broad strokes in the way that matters, and I say well done. I think that was good.
Thank you. I love an A minus. You know, I was solidly an A minus guy in some subjects, so I've learned to love an A minus.
You don't want to be an A plus. You don't want to be an A plus. Those are type A overachievers. You don't want to be.
Okay, wait. Hold on. Not the A plus. Hold on. Some of us like A pluses.
That's fair. Well, we have an A minus on the board for me, and that is going to contribute to your case that you make, Jared, and we're very much looking forward to it. Michael, you want to bring him in?
Yeah, so, I mean, if you've listened to us before, dear listeners, you know how we like to start this. Before we dig too deep into Bowie and the album, we got a question for you, Jared. What's your relationship with music? Past, present, and future, I guess? I don't know. However you want to answer that. Writ large, yes.
Music is probably... not probably. Music is the most essential art form to me personally. And I say this, and Michael, you know this, I'm a theater artist. I'm an actor and a writer, and I've worked in, various theater companies. But if I had my druthers, I would go see music every day. I would go see live music every day. I think it occupies a particularly unique position in our lives as human beings. And by that, I mean this, like, if we go to the biggest gatherings of people today, like let's say a football game, and here we have 75,000 people, half of them are rooting for the other team, but if I go to that same stadium to see the Rolling Stones, everyone is there for the same reason. They're in people of different backgrounds, races, religions, political affiliations. They come together over this shared joy of whatever music is they love. And I think, I don't want to be all hippy-dippy about it, but I really do believe that that's true. And then there is a certain joy to be found in the experience of music that you can't really get anywhere else. And music was always on in my house. my mom in particular was always playing music, and her stuff was like late 60s, 70s, like singer-songwriter person. Like she loved Paul Simon and James Taylor and Judy Collins and Carly Simon and like that whole, Crosby, Stills and Nash, like that whole crew. And so I grew up listening to that stuff. And so just music was always on. And I just immediately took to it and always wanted to be involved in it somehow. Like when I was in college, my original dream was I wanted to write for Rolling Stone. I wanted to be a journalist for Rolling Stone.
Yeah, totally.
Very Almost Famous.
And, and have the whole Almost Famous life. I wanted that to be my life.
You have Phil Hoffman vibes in a good way.
Yes. Thank you. But like today, even like, I will go out of my way to make plans to see bands that I love, musicians that I love, go out of the country to see bands that I love, music, rock and roll tourism kind of thing. To me, it is essential to me as breathing in a lot of ways. I read endlessly about it. You guys can't see this, but right here to my left, there's a shelf that is stuffed with books about musicians and rock and roll, and including about 30 books on Bowie. And it's just, I think it can be the most joyful art form that we have as a species, as a creative race of creatures. And so for me, it's the thing. It's just the thing. Yeah.
4,000 points for the most joyful, arguably the most joyful experience we can get. Because I couldn't agree more on that one.
Did you ever get to see Bowie in concert as someone who went to concerts?
I only got to see him once, unfortunately. Like somehow all the times that he toured, I was never really available, but I did see him once, 1995. I was still in college, and it was the summer he did a tour with 9 Inch Nails. And
wow.
Give me a break. Give me a break.
And it was the Bowie was touring behind an album he released that year called Outside One is the name of that record, which is I don't know if you guys know that record. It's a very strange, very difficult concept record about a serial killer in the future whose work is viewed as art by the masses.
I've heard of this. I didn't make it there in the listen through. But
it was when he reunited. Again, this is going a little deep in the weeds, but
go deep, baby.
The famous Berlin trilogy in the 70s, like Low, those were all produced by Brian Eno. Outside was his reunion with Brian Eno. And it's a tough record. I mean, I really like it, but it's a tough record. And anyway, he was touring behind that record, and he just asked Reznor to come with him. And so what I remember about that show really vividly is 9 Inch Nails opened, and they weren't touring. I don't think they didn't have a new album out at the time, but they were just sort of playing, stuff off of Pretty Hate Machine and stuff like that. What they did was, as 9 Inch Nails set came to a close, as they were drawing to a close, Bowie came out, and they did like 4 songs together, including Hurt and Scary Monsters and Super Creeps from Bowie. And then each other's bands they morphed into each other. Like Bowie's band came on, and 9 Inch Nails slowly left, and they sort of transitioned that way. And then it was just Bowie on stage. The tricky thing about that show was, if I remember it correctly, the show was right before this Outside album came out. And he mostly played that record, and none of us knew what it was. And so it was a great night, but it was a tough night because that material is tough, and none of us had ever heard it before. So we were all kind of like, what is this? And fascinating, and it was amazing to see him, and he sounded great, and his band was awesome, but we didn't know what the material was. So I remember it being a challenging night at the rock show, and I'm all for that. I'm like, let the artists do what they want. But I would be lying if I didn't say that, the 20-year-old me wasn't hoping he would like rip into Rebel Rebel or something just to kind of pop the crowd. But he didn't. And that's okay. And I look back on it now, I'm like, that he can do whatever he wants. He's David Bowie. He can do whatever he wants.
He's earned that. Yeah.
Yeah, he's earned that right. And so that was the only time I ever got to see him.
I want to ask a question there. Did you, and I know we're not talking about Prince, but since you're a Prince guy as well, were you able to see Prince?
I saw Prince twice.
Twice, okay. So one more time than you saw Bowie.
One more time I saw Bowie, and Prince.
Did he play the hits?
He played some hits for sure. Prince and Bowie are they follow similar tracks. Yeah, they followed their muses. They did what they wanted. Chameleonic, some might say.
Some might say.
Like Prince's power to hold an audience in his hand is really only rivaled by the only other experience, and I've seen thousands of concerts. The only other person I ever saw who had the charisma to do that was Bono. In fact,
no shit.
Wow.
Yeah. Oh yeah. U2 live is an extraordinary experience. Prince had that charisma, and he played hits. He played deep cuts, and also kind of just played what he wanted. Prince's set was basically a plus sign. He played to the rounds, and the plus sign was sitting in the middle. And I've told this story before, but it's worth repeating. The whole band leaves the stage. The lights go dark. Everyone's screaming and going nuts. And we've been listening to Prince and his band for 3 hours. And then you just hear those chords, the very famous chords to Purple Rain, and everybody's screaming and going out of their minds. And a single spotlight hits the plus sign. And Prince rises on a hydraulic lift from the center wearing this suit. And the suit was, one half of it was like royal blue, and the other half was blood red, and it had fringe on the arms that went down to the floor with his guitar. He looked like a god. He was like some kind of Aztec god who had risen from the past to, it was, I never saw anything like it.
You have goosebumped me. You have goosebumped me currently.
Yeah, it was everyone, like there were these women, there were these middle-aged African-American women in the same row as me. One of them fainted. It was fantastic. Like legit fainted. Unbelievable.
Yeah.
And he played Purple Rain, and I don't know, like 20 minutes. Like it seemed like it just went on forever. It was an eternity. Yeah. And I would have been happy to stay there the rest of my life.
Yeah.
That's what.
Wow.
That's
what, God. Yeah.
Yeah.
You get 1,000,000 points for I would be happy to have stayed there the rest of my life.
It's true. I would have. I would have.
That is it.
Happily.
That is the power right there. And then I'll give you a good 9,000 points for just Bowie times Bowie X 9 Inch Nails, because that is a combination for the ages. And I would have, even if it would have been that experience with the challenging album and not necessarily playing the hits, I would pay a good deal of money to have seen that concert. So I'm glad you were able to.
I never get the thing of fans who bitch when whoever they're seeing doesn't play the song that they want to hear or however they want to hear it. Like I was at Jazz Fest in New Orleans, and Robert Plant was playing, and there were these two bros, and I whatever, these two bros were in front of me, and all they did was complain how Robert Plant wasn't playing Whole Lotta Love, or he wasn't playing. I'm like, he's Robert Plant. He can do whatever he wants. He doesn't owe you anything. And his band was unbelievable, and the show was unbelievable. And I've never understood. I cannot subscribe to that. I'm not going to be a person who complains when the band I'm seeing or the artist I'm seeing doesn't want to play their single biggest hit. They have every right not to. Yeah. It's fine. Maybe.
And also, if they're gonna, do you really want to hear "Whole Lotta Love" with just Robert Plant and not Jimmy Page? I guess you can, but still, like,
you can. But it's like it's also like let's be glad we're here. You can say you saw Robert Plant. You can say you saw Prince. For me, I've had this conversation with my good friend Dan Hodge, who, Michael, I think you know Dan.
Dan
and I talk a lot about how, that generation of artists, we're losing them. They're going.
Mm-hmm.
And there's not a lot of them left. And that it's important to use Dan's phrase, to bear witness. Like, for example, I'm really grateful that the August before Aretha Franklin died, she played at the Mann Music Center. And I went to go see her, and I didn't have a ticket. And I showed up at the gate, and there were so few people there, they just let me walk in to see Aretha Franklin.
That's ridiculous.
It was ridiculous. There wasn't anybody there.
Wow.
And so I feel very grateful I got to see Aretha before we lost her. You have to see these people before they go, because their music is quite literally the soundtrack of our lives. And once they're gone, they're not coming back. That's it.
I discovered recently that Aretha Franklin only had 2 number 1 hits. One of them was Respect, and the other was her duet with George Michael.
Yeah. Well, to that point, Bowie only had 1 number 1 hit. Fame was his only number 1 hit.
Yeah.
Neil Young only has 1 number 1 hit.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Heart of Gold. Yeah. There's a lot of those people who we take for granted as these incredible songwriters and musicians who were never popular in the popular sense of the word. They had legions of fans, but their music was maybe just a little too odd or a little too difficult or
just right ahead of the beat. Right ahead of.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. It's a little bit ahead of the beat, and that's certainly true of Bowie.
Okay, yeah. Well, let's talk about this album in particular. What do you
Yeah.
remember about discovering this album? Do you have a specific memory of your first listen to it? Do you have visceral memories of, like the way you encountered it? Tell us a little bit more about that.
So, like I said, my intro to Bowie was 80s Bowie. Let's Dance, Labyrinth, of course, a formative film for me.
Yeah.
Which also has resulted in my enduring and long-lasting love of Jennifer Connelly.
Preach.
All time. Just in my heart forever, Jennifer.
Yeah.
So I went backwards from there. I think the first song I heard off of Ziggy Stardust was Starman. Right? Mm-hmm. That makes sense.
Like you do. This was all sort of just when I was growing into a consciousness of what music meant beyond like, oh, I like this song that I heard on the radio or whatever, right? And I had always heard that Ziggy Stardust was this concept record, and like it had all these things it was saying, and there was a storyline and all this stuff. I bought it on cassette and I listened to it, and I didn't get the story. The story really falls apart. It's not really there for much of the record at all. But I thought it was. And how old was I when I listened to this? Like maybe I was 12 or 13. So I thought, I'm not hearing it right. I must not be getting it. And so I kept listening to it over and over and over again to try to find the story in there. Not unlike when you're listening to Tommy or, these other concept records. That's a good comparison. Yeah.
Right. Where the story is just really hard to parse. And it's particularly true in the case of Ziggy Stardust because, as I said, the story isn't really there. It's maybe in the first track and the last track in Starman, and then it's kind of not there at all.
Well, if I'm remembering correctly, it was sort of that was threaded through after recording all the songs, right? That's
correct. Yeah, he had this idea. He had the idea for the Ziggy Stardust character, and who was inspired by a variety of people like the rock and roller Gene Vincent and the legendary Stardust Cowboy, which is where he got the Stardust name from. He had the idea for the character, but that's correct, Tyler. Like he thought after, and there was a bunch of songs that were recorded for this album that didn't make the final cut of it. The final compilation of it. And so after the fact, he's like, oh yeah, this is going to be this. This. He called it the story of a plastic rock star. Mm-hmm. That was the phrase he used, the plastic rock star. But it's not really there. It doesn't really support it. But that doesn't matter because as you listen to these songs, there clearly is a thematic element, and also every track is a banger.
Yes,
every track is just an absolute banger,
which is not true of every Bowie album. Too.
What is absolutely not true of every Bowie album.
This is strictly bangers.
This is strictly bangers from top to bottom. He's only got a couple of records that you can say that about, and this is definitely one of them. The opening track, 5 Years, is so haunting, and it's such an unusual way to open a record with basically a song about apocalypse. Apocalypse thing.
It's
in
my genre.
1972, yeah, totally. In 1972, that was pretty rare. So, but Ziggy has been with me in my life since then, and I feel like every time I listen to the record, which is a lot. Always often just on shuffle for me. I'm always learning and hearing something new.
That's great. That's great.
This is
40,000 points for strictly bangers, by the way. I think that's a strong
I can't wait
point
to see
in
what my
your favor.
total score is at the end.
You'll never know. I'll never tell.
You have to keep track for yourself, Jared. Like,
got it. Got it. Copy. Fair.
It's funny you say like, yeah, this is, sometimes we ask people like if you have to listen to the album in order, or like does it have every song have to be listenable? I mean, this does actually feel because there's not a really strict plot line to it that you can shuffle this album and it still is pretty good.
Oh yeah.
I mean, not just pretty
absolutely.
good, not just pretty good.
You absolutely can. I mean, I think you could shuffle them in different orders and it would be fine. You would still have a great experience. Mm-hmm. He obviously chose them in this way for a particular reason to loosely follow this arc, whatever, blah, blah, blah. But if one chose to listen to it not in that order, I don't think it would affect your experience of the music at all. Except for, I will say this, I do think probably no matter what you do, you should always start with 5 Years and you should always end with Rock and Roll Suicide, because I like that take. Those songs are only bookends.
Yeah.
Anchors. They're anchors.
Those are anchors. Everything else in the middle, you could shuffle around. But those two tracks are definitely anchors. Yeah.
It's like an Olympic swim team, right? Like you have, wasn't Phelps was always the anchor, wasn't he?
Right.
Or was
he always the anchor. Right. Or like a relay race or whatever. Like you have to have those two. And they, if Rock and Roll Suicide was in the middle of the record, it wouldn't make any sense. It would feel out of place.
Well, hold up before we get into that. This feels like an excellent time to share with our listeners what your standout track is from this album.
Yes, that's true. My standout track is Rock and Roll Suicide, the closer of Ziggy Stardust.
All right. Well, why don't we give it a listen, and then after we hear that, we'd love to hear more about why you think it's a standout.
That's the end of part 1. If you access this episode via our YouTube playlist, you're about to hear our guest's standout track. If you'd like to jump ahead to part 2, you'll find a link in the description of this episode.